But as we continue in the story, VJ Records, an independent label out of Chicago, released Please Please Me in the US in February of 1963, about a year before they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. But Capitol Records, which was owned by EMI in England, the Beatles UK label, Capitol was not interested in releasing the early Beatles singles. And so Brian Epstein negotiated with them, with VJ Records. They released them. They had Swan and Tolly were a couple of other labels under that VJ. And they released them in 63 in the United States. They got almost no radio play, considered a flop. No interest in North America in 1963. October 13th, 1963, the Beatles appeared on Sunday night at the London Palladium TV show. The popularity spreads from the United Kingdom throughout Europe. And this is widely considered the start of Beatlemania, at least throughout Britain and Europe. Now, just for comparison, only 1 year earlier, in November of 1962, they were playing at the Star Club in Hamburg with their new drummer, Ringo Starr. They had been appearing in Hamburg 2 or 3 times since they first went there. And so in 1 year, they're now playing for this wonderful TV show in London. And a year later, November 4th, 1963, the Beatles performed for the Queen Mother at the Royal Variety Performance. November 22nd, 1963, with the Beatles, their second album comes out in the UK and holds the #1 position on British charts for 21 weeks. Actually, it knocked their first album out of the #1 spot. So at this point, they're competing with themselves. Those 2 albums would combine to dominate the top of the UK charts for 52 straight weeks. Also, November 22nd, 1963, Mike Wallace is prepared to air a 5-minute story about the Beatles on CBS. But if you're from the United States, you know that date. This is what changed that headline for the evening news. And it's my personal opinion, for those of us in the United States, the young people of America were so shocked and so grieving over this sudden assassination of President Kennedy that the Beatles' arrival in just a few months was sort of a relief from that grief. The music was so uplifting, it was so fresh, that there was a hunger among young people in the United States for something to be happy about. The single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, was released in Britain in November of 1963, and remember, Capitol, the subsidiary of EMI, had resisted issuing Beatle recordings in the US, but the Beatles had a hit record in Europe and a planned appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show for early 1964. Seizing the opportunity, Epstein demanded $40,000 from Capitol Records to promote the single in the United States. And the most the Beatles had ever previously spent on an advertising campaign was $5,000. December 1963, Walter Cronkite airs the short CBS piece on the Beatles that was cut in November. Capitol had actually intended a release in mid-January of 1964 to coincide with the Ed Sullivan Show. However, a 15-year-old fan, Marcia Albert from Silver Spring, Maryland, was determined to get a hold of this single earlier. She called Carol James, who was the DJ for WWDC, a radio station out of Washington, D.C., and he got British Overseas Airways to ship in a copy of I Want to Hold Your Hand from England. Carol James then called Marcia up the day he got the record and said, "If you can get down here by 5 o'clock, we'll let you introduce it." So she had to get out of school, probably, but made it down to the station in time and introduced the record with, "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time on the air in the United States, here are the Beatles singing I Want to Hold Your Hand." The song proved to be a huge hit, a surprise for this radio station because they usually played easy listening singers like Andy Williams instead of rock and roll. And James took to playing the song repeatedly on his station, often turning down the song in the middle to make the declaration, "This is a Carol James exclusive," to avoid theft of the song by other stations who might record it off the air and then play it themselves. Capitol threatened to seek a court order banning airplay of I Want to Hold Your Hand, but Carol James and his radio station just ignored the threat. And Capitol came to the conclusion that they should take advantage of this free publicity. So they released the single 2 weeks ahead of schedule on December 16th, all because of a 15-year-old girl. And in February, the British invasion begins. The Beatles had never been to the United States before, except for George. His older sister, remember, Louise, had immigrated to Benton, Illinois, a town of about 8,000, earlier in 1963, and George came over to visit her in September, just months before the United States would explode at the mere mention of the Beatles. Her family kept encouraging him to get a haircut during his visit there. Brian Epstein had made sure that Capitol would promote I Want to Hold Your Hand since its release in December, and it had reached #1, as I said, on February 1st, which is not bad timing. Brian Epstein cut an unorthodox deal when he signed them to play on The Ed Sullivan Show. Rather than get the band a higher rate of money for a single performance, Epstein negotiated a lower rate of just $10,000, but secured the band headliner billing as well as 3 nights on the show instead of just 1. The promotional value implied credibility, it's the Ed Sullivan Show, and repeat exposure over 3 consecutive Sundays that came from headlining the show helped rocket the band to the top of the U.S. charts rapidly. It kept them in the news. It's a genius move.
Later they said there was the least reported, or there was no reported crime. Even the criminals had a rest for like 10 minutes while we were on.
So much to unpack from that. How many of you recall seeing that TV show? Yeah, a lot of hands usually go up. I'm raising my hand as well. I saw them on TV just like those girls that we saw in their home watching it, and their daddies in the background going, I don't understand what this is all about. But my girls seem excited about something. All right, a record 73 million people watched the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show because of the way they kind of hyped it up ahead of time. Elvis had gathered approximately 60 million viewers on his first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was at the time a record. Now, I always ask how many people saw it, and usually many hands go up. On one of my previous cruises, a lady caught me later and said, well, I raised my hand, but I wanted to tell you I was in the studio audience. Yeah, exactly. I almost didn't get started on my talk because I just wanted to sit there and listen to her because she was enchanted. If you want to hear that whole story, ask me on the ship because it's a lot of fun. I'm telling you, you are sailing with celebrities around you that you haven't even met yet. And yesterday I was privileged to talk to some folks that had heard the Beatles as the Quarrymen or had played at the Jacaranda Club and things like that. So even on this ship, there's a lot of folks who have wonderful stories to share. Share them with me. I love them.